It's now been 1 year since the mass shooting at Oxford High School. 4 students were killed. Hana St. Juliana, who was 14 years old at the time, Shilling, who was 17 years old at the time, Madisyn Baldwin, 17 years old, and Tate Myre, 16 years old. Their lives were cut short when shots rang in the halls of their high school on November 30th, 2021. Tate was a star football player at Oxford High School, proudly wearing number 42. In the days and weeks after the shooting, many people remember Tate as a mentor to so many in the community. Stories his family say they were hearing for the first time. On this 1-year anniversary of the deadly school shooting, I sat down with the Myre family. They tell me in the days following the shooting, they heard from middle schoolers who looked up to Tate. He was a varsity football player and a varsity wrestler. And most importantly, for Trent and Tate Myre, he was their younger brother. And for Buck and Sherry, he was their son. The family described him as having these traits like trustworthy, caring, fun, and positive. He exhibited those on the football field, in the classroom, and at home. Over the past year, the family has gone through something nobody ever should have to go through.
I feel we have to be strong. You know, that Tate would want us to be, and our community needs us to be. And, you know, someone needs to lead the community and outside of that to something better.
I think sometimes we don't feel strong, you know, because it's sad. I mean, we're sad every day, but you know, we just keep grinding away and making sure that we're continuing the work that Tate started and try to make him proud and try to make our community proud.
Lori Bourgeau tells me she can't even count on one hand how many times her son has had to miss school because of the Oxford shooting. Her son was at Oxford High School a year ago when the shooting happened. One local psychologist says school shootings can cause fear of going to school, post-traumatic stress, and trouble sleeping, all behavior changes that should be addressed.
So much that has changed. Going to school is extremely difficult for him. There hasn't been a week he's made it to school every day.
Lori Bourgeau's 18-year-old son is a senior at Oxford High School. Bourgeau says Mason grew up with Tate Myre, one of the 4 students killed in the mass shooting at Oxford. She says Mason is constantly affected by what's happened on November 30th, 2021.
He knew what he heard. He heard every gunshot. He heard the kids. He heard what was happening. Well, they put our kids back in the exact same classrooms that they were in when they went back to school. So he was in that classroom that he was locked down in, that he was hearing those things. And the first day the teacher shut the door, he had to get out. He absolutely had to get out. So it's not just the sound of shutting the door, it's being shut in there that sometimes triggers him.
Bourgeau also says Mason is triggered by loud noises such as fireworks and by being in open public spaces.
Movie theaters, the dark space with people around, just any stores, things like that where there's a large group, it is much more difficult. And then if something happens with a loud noise, it just sends him thinking, and a lot of times it's, let's get out of here. It changes you. It's psychologically, mentally, something just changes.
And those changes is what psychologist Dr. Dan Doolin wants people to look out for in others after such a traumatic experience like the Oxford shooting. Dr. Doolin works with children and families at Mott Children's Health Center. He says not only do kids go through trauma after a traumatic event, adults do as well.
There are adults who I imagine are sometimes scared to be at school, who have to model for all the young people that they are confident in the school's procedures and yet may have some worries themselves, and who have to look at their students and do a miniature risk assessment in their mind. Does this person seem to present any dangers or concerns to me?
Dr. Doolin says it's okay to talk about these traumatic stressors and events because it helps people overcome that experience.
Give them some control over what happened, and it takes the sting and power out of those triggers. When they see something that's similar or even just barely reminds them of it, it can be quite subtle. They can go into like a really nervous emotional reaction.
We are marking an emotional anniversary. Today marks 1 year since the deadly Oxford High School shooting. 4 students killed, 6 other students and a teacher injured, and countless others in the community traumatized. Next year, survivors will relive the shooting if they choose to testify against the alleged gunman. 16-year-old Ethan Crumbly pleaded guilty to all charges just last month. That includes felony charges of terrorism and murder. But his parents, who also face charges tied to the shooting, have yet to stand trial, and it might be a while before that happens. Just yesterday, the Michigan Supreme Court pausing the cases against James and Jennifer Crumbly. The couple is facing involuntary manslaughter charges for allegedly ignoring signs that their son Ethan was a threat and for allowing him easy access to a gun. Their trial was set to begin in January. That's now on hold. The Michigan Court of Appeals will decide if there's enough evidence to prove the couple had prior knowledge of that shooting. Tonight, some are wondering what's been done in Lansing to stop another school shooting from happening in Michigan. Our political reporter, Rachel Louise Just, takes us into a year filled with gridlock and frustration.
Just before 1 o'clock on November 30th, a moment of silence around Michigan, remembering the 4 children's lives lost at Oxford High School 1 year ago, right to the moment. At Michigan's capital, there is a silence that's been ringing for months.
I'm leaving quite frustrated, honestly.
Since June, Michigan's full-time lawmakers have spent less than a week in session, with no clear reason given for the absence. In the time that lawmakers have been in these halls, gun safety bills that some Republicans say they'd support, including red flag laws and gun storage requirements, sit untouched.
We've been pushing them for years. It's ridiculous that we've got to the point where it's this horrifying and still not a hearing, not a vote.
Leaders in the legislature did make some school safety investments in this year's budget, including almost $500 million for school resource officers and mental health funding. But even after Michigan leaders saw gun violence reach the state's own students, some lawmakers say it's been 365 days and not enough has been done.
It's amazing that they would go through that they would sit there and watch what happened at Oxford and still refuse to take any action, still say that this is not the right time.
The Republican House Speaker created a bipartisan school safety task force.
We would have conversations and all 8 of us would agree that, yes, this is a recommendation that we should go forward with.
The group spent months meeting with experts in law enforcement, psychology, and education, creating recommendations for addressing mental health, data sharing, and school hardening. Of the dozen pieces of legislation they've introduced, not one bill has come to a vote.
We've put so much work into this, and literally kids' lives are at stake here.
With 2 session days scheduled in the House for the rest of the year, Van Singel says there's no way that these bills will be voted on before this legislature ends. Come January, when Democrats take over, it's unclear exactly what will happen, but some leaders have indicated they do want to take steps on gun safety.